If personality is an unbroken series of successful gestures, I'm not sure that you can read this from back there, then there was something gorgeous about him, some heightened sensitivity to the promises of life, as if he were related to one of those intricate machines that register earthquakes 10,000 miles away. This responsiveness had nothing to do with that flabby impressionability which is dignified under the name of creative temperament. Now, this is not a phrase with which you are probably familiar, but creative temperament was a common way to describe people who were weak, perhaps, in some way. It was an extraordinary gift for hope, a romantic readiness such as I have never found in any other person, and which it is not likely I shall ever find again. No, Gatsby turned out all right at the end. It is what preyed on Gatsby, what foul dust floated in the wake of his dreams, that temporarily closed out my interest in the abortive sorrows and short-winded elations of men. My, that is some language right there. So this is, I'm certainly not the first person to pull this quote. It's a very famous quote. But this says something about Nick as well as it does about Gatsby. And so how can we interpret all of this? How can we break this down into something that is a little bit more concrete in terms of describing Gatsby, who he is, what he is? He knows what's going on around him. Yes, yeah. So heightened sensitivity to the promises of life. So aware of things, surroundings, I will say. Think of his party, right? In chapter 3, we're at the first one of Gatsby's parties, the first one that Nick has attended. And Gatsby seems to know everything that's going on, but it's very clear that he's not involved in it. He's kind of, I don't know if it's even fair to say that he's orchestrating it. He's not causing all of these things. He's just providing the place and the booze and the music and so on for these things to happen. But he's not drinking. But he knows who everyone is, even if they, and in this case Nick, doesn't know who he is right away. So, but the promises of life is something more than just awareness of his surroundings. This sensitivity to the promises of life. Boy, that's quite a phrase. What can we make of that? So so he's not flabbily impressionable. That was intentionally awkward. He doesn't have this creative temperament. He's explaining that his sensitivity is an extraordinary gift for hope, a romantic readiness. So he sees the good, the possibilities, and what does any person have hope for in general? The future. So you might have hope for money in the future, you might have hope for world peace in the future, you might have hope for romance in the future, but it's the future, right? That's the foundation of hope. Now, we know here, and it's interesting, that Gatsby turned out all right in the end. Our narrator is telling us this story from the future. These aren't diary entries. Maybe the future isn't quite the right way. The narrator is telling us this story already knowing its conclusion. Does that make sense? So the narrator isn't going to be surprised by anything that happens. The narrator is reflecting back on all of this after it's happened. Now, this is a real advantage to using a first-person narrator rather than an impersonal third-person narrator who can't reflect back and say, in hindsight, this happenstance was really important, or this was pivotal, or it seems now that should have been obvious at the time, right? We can't have those kind of reflections with an impersonal third-person narrator. So, in any case, without getting too far back to Nick there, he turned out all right in the end. It is what preyed on him, what foul dust floated in the wake of his dreams. It is perhaps too early in the book to try to parse this too much, to try to interpret this too much. I can ask you if you have any preliminary thoughts on this, but I would suspect that because we don't really have a sense yet of any conflict involving Gatsby, that we might not have a context for this. Abby, your thoughts?
What the conflict's gonna be.
Okay.
So Gatsby's gonna tell Nick like some deep dark secret, and like I don't know, Nick is gonna let it slip, or someone else is gonna find out about it, and then Gatsby's gonna like lose his money or something.
I will confirm insofar as to say that there are many secrets that all seem to become known to Nick in some way. Does Nick himself have secrets? Has that been mentioned? What about, now I believe it's in the first chapter yet, when Nick goes to visit his cousin, Daisy and Tom. It's Daisy that's his cousin, I believe, and not Tom, right? Yes. So he goes to visit them, and they ask him, or they congratulate him, "Oh, we heard you were engaged." Right? What's that about? And then he just kind of says, "No, you heard wrong. That never happened." Something fishy there? Certainly, news of that sort in the 1920s does not travel accidentally. So what we're going to learn a little bit more about, not much, is that even Nick has his secrets. He is basically running away from some girl back home, and that's what he's doing in New York. And the exact nature of that relationship is never really made clear, but it's sort of implied that everyone thinks that they're engaged because she won't leave him alone or something like that, and he just needs to get away. But we're not sure how much we trust his version of these events. So even Nick has some secrets. But what preyed on Gatsby, what foul dust floated in the wake of his dreams, perhaps too early for us to form much of an opinion about that. What we know so far is that Gatsby is a young man, something like Nick's age, and that he is extremely wealthy. He throws huge parties at which he himself does not party. That's kind of what we know so far, right? And he likes to call people old sport, which is quite amusing. And you'll find, well, I shouldn't say you will, you may find yourself calling people old sport from time to time. And every time I read Gatsby, I find myself. somewhat inclined to refer to people in my vicinity as old sport. I'm not sure if that is as condescending as it sounds, or perhaps more condescending than in fact, but it's amusing anyway. Any other observations on Gatsby at this point?
A lot of people like think he's mysterious and like speculate about his past and stuff.
Yeah. He is definitely mysterious. Everyone talks about him. There are multiple stories about him. He was a spy for the Germans in the Great War, be World War I. Or he was, for sure he's killed somebody, or whatever. There's all these stories, like everyone's got their own theory. Jordan says, he told me once that he's an Oxford man, but I don't believe it. Which is very interesting. Did you guys read that part? I think that's in chapter 3. Said that he was an Oxford man, but I don't believe it. So he is extremely mysterious, and the story kind of revolves around Gatsby's mystery. And we gradually unravel more and more of it until he starts to make a little bit more sense to us. So we're being set up for him here by, him being described at the beginning in these sorts of terms tells us that he is a very unique sort of individual. And in fact, the extraordinary gift for hope and the romantic readiness never found in any other person, those are pretty extreme words, not just like, yeah, he's kind of a schmomancy guy, or whatever, but this extraordinary gift for hope, it makes him sound like almost an impossible characteristic in a person. Like he's bordering on, it's impossible for him to be this way as much as he apparently is. Which of course makes him interesting and very likely symbolic as well. Okay. Let's see. Robin?
It also pointed to that he didn't have like girls around him often, because there was that one scene that they were on the dance floor and there was like girls all over the other guys, but no one was there.
Yeah, the line was something like, no bob, meaning a haircut, touched his shoulder, and no dance line included him, that sort of thing. So what's up with that?
Like if he's so mysterious and young.
He's young and extremely wealthy, handsome and charming, and yet doesn't seem interested in the ladies. What is the deal with that? So certainly that is a great part of his mystery. And probably if he was young and very wealthy and threw these parties, but he got just as drunk as everybody else, and he danced with all the ladies and stuff like that, no one would think him that mysterious. They would just think he was a young party guy who happened to be rich, right? But that is all what adds to his mystery, his myth or his legend.